Hey guys, do you know someone considering renting their property as an Airbnb? I have worked with Rental Advisor for over a decade, and Rental Advisor provides free rental projections to prospective owners, realtors, and investors for any property in the US. So if you know someone considering getting into the vacation rental industry, have them email management@myrentaladvisor.com to get their free revenue projections. No serious person believes the story of Joseph Smith, right?
This religion is so ridiculous, Tom Cruise would not join it, and Glenn Beck did. For example, there's one question I always like to ask prophets, and that is, what did you do before you got into the prophesizing business? And the answer, with many of them, but most prominently Joseph Smith, is, I was a con man.
After all, the Joseph Smith story is obviously just the story of a weirdo con man who is grifting gullible people while cheating on his wife, right? Actually, no. You see, most people like Bill Maher only have a pop culture level understanding of the Joseph Smith story. Serious non-believers who deeply examine Smith end up finding a bit of a mystery in the person of Joseph Smith, and most do not actually subscribe to the con man theory for the reasons we will go into in this video. Brett McDonald has a 32-part lecture series called LDS Truth Claims on YouTube, which I will link in the video description. I actually watched all 32 of these courses during 6 months as I did my nightly dish duty. Brett digs into the extensive historical scholarship, and with the rigor of an attorney, he explores the enigma that is created when we examine the Joseph Smith story in close detail. Despite what you have heard, saying Joseph was a con man probably just shows you are unfamiliar with his story. But I'll let Brett explain.
Very similar to that positive case is the argument to absurdity. Harold Bloom, we talked about his view on Joseph Smith. I like his view, or to cite it. He's essentially a disinterested observer. He's atheistic. He's a non-practicing Jew. And it's very rare do you get someone studying Joseph Smith that doesn't have an axe to grind, pro or con. After his study, this is what he concluded. If one decides that Joseph Smith was no prophet, then one's dominant emotion towards him must be wonder. There is no other figure remotely like him in our entire national history, and it is unlikely that anyone like him ever can come again. And I would argue that that's right. If again, we've said it's reasonable that he's a prophet. So if you want to take the view that he's not a prophet, that's reasonable too. You're not, intellectualism, reason. Is not to the burden of proof where it's required of you intellectually, right? It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's not a mathematical requirement of that level. But if he's not, right, what does he accomplish in his career? It's absolutely astounding, right? He starts off this young kid in the backwoods of New York, poor, and he says, I'm going to start a religion because I want either power or money or sexual conquest or whatever. Right? I'm gonna do this. So how does he do it? Well, he creates fake metal plates to start with. He says, I'm going to create a book of scripture. So he creates fake metal plates weighing between 40 and 60 pounds. He carves those with expert carvings as he has to dupe 22 natural witnesses that he allows to inspect these things. Now, he's got to be so confident in this fraud that he's perpetrating that he's going to allow these characters to be copied and actually want them to seek out the best scholars of his day. We talked about how those scholars weren't particularly good, and Charles Anthon wasn't a great scholar, but in his day they were the best they could find. So again, he's confident enough in his fraud that he's going to allow them to be copied and send them out to the best scholars. They are actually believed by those scholars, such as Mitchell and Anthon, right? Because if not, then we have Martin Harris as part of conspiracy. And if he's part of conspiracy, we have all these problems because there's no evidence he's part of conspiracy, and he's alienated from Joseph. We went through all of that in the Martin Harris. So we assume it dupes Anthon as Martin says. His metallurgical fraud is so convincing that all 8 formal natural witnesses believe it until death, despite their estrangement from Joseph and persecution for so saying. Now, then we get into these visionary stuff. Some people have pointed out that this could either be hypnosis. So we went through, his apparent ability to induce hypnotic trance for Oliver and David, and then separately for Martin Harris, of these identical visions. Others have proposed that it's what's called second sight, so that would be a hallucination. If it's hallucination, again, think about this. Joseph writes down that 3 people are going to have these hallucinations, and then he picks the 3 people that are able to have these complex hallucinations. So, again, extraordinarily lucky for him to pick the 3 right people to have these complex hallucinations. Again, they are complex. Audio, visual visions that are specific, experienced in the same manner, which is in contravention of known hypnotherapy. These also happen without his presence, which again, extraordinarily lucky for Mary Whitmer, Zaire Pulsifer, Harrison Burgess, and at least Luke Johnson. These hypnotic trances happened prior to the rise of hypnotic research in a location in rural New York where there's no evidence that even knowledge existed. It's so effective for Martin, Oliver, and David, Mary, and others, it endures for the rest of their lives. Right? Despite no relationship and ridicule, and much to gain, especially in the case of Oliver with losing political campaigns. Joseph Smith then induces vision of John the Baptist laying on hands, right? So that's touching he and Oliver, and then again for Peter, James, and John. A vision of Moses, Elias, Jesus, and for Oliver and he. Again, so Oliver's involved with lots of this stuff that he can potentially out him with. This hallucination is so effective for Oliver that it endures for decades despite no relationship and large potential gains for denial. All right, now he's got through that first part of visions and fakeness, but now he's got to put something down. So he puts his head in the hat and he uses the stones that he used to use to help people find lost things and hopefully buried treasure. And he dictates 588 pages of what we have as the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon. He takes 63 days to do so. He starts mid-narrative in Mosiah, works to the end, right? Then finishes at the beginning of the current narrative, right? Because he dictated a portion which is lost, so now, he's got to just start from the middle and go around. Okay, so he's got to use no other sources, pick up without having read prior sections, and spell proper names, right? Otherwise, we have this huge conspiracy because they have no evidence that he had other materials. We talked about all the evidence for his origin theory, or his origin story. So he covers more than 1,000 years of history. He names 200 individuals, 100 distinct places. He incorporates multiple genres from narration to inserted sermons, letters to scriptural commentary and poetry. He's quoting entire sections of Isaiah, right? It's complicated chronology, geography, and genealogy, yet remains internally consistent. Chronology is handled without glitches despite several flashbacks and temporally overlapping narratives. It keeps straight both the order and family connections among the 26 Nephite record keepers that he's making up and 41 Jaredite kings that he's making up, including the rival lines. He conjures up 15 non-biblical names. Good, he's got to make up a bunch of them. So here's 15 that are not in the Bible. But then they're now attested in ancient Hebrew scriptures, Hebrew inscriptions in the Boule that we showed. 14 of which are dating before 587 BC. Right? Then he makes up 4 names which turn out to be authentic Egyptian names. He's just, the luck is ongoing, right? He then makes up this story, right? It's 508 pages, 60 days, he's got to go quickly, right? He's on a quick pace. But it's got to be consistent with the culture and situation in Jerusalem in 600 BC. There's no source material for the situation in 600 BC in Jerusalem. That I've never seen any proposed source material for any of the things that we talked about. Despite the Western world having no knowledge, and in fact contradictory knowledge about pre-Islamic Arabian geography and culture, right? We showed what, if he had source material, what he would have wrote about Arabia, and it was exact opposite. Joseph's story is consistent with later discoveries in all of the following ways, right? The Frankincense Trail, and Nahum, and Bountiful. Despite the world having no knowledge about pre-Columbian Mesoamerican geography, chronology, and culture, right? He's got to actually create something that fits. Lo and behold, it fits. We have 600 internally consistent geographical statements that match a real-world location, including specific stories, battles, Limhi's expedition with rivers. Pre-Columbian culture chronology matches time, death, and geography to actual societies that we find, literate societies, cultural trends, economic growth, everything that we went through in the Book of Mormon. Despite living in the modern age of warfare, and Joseph liked warfare, his version of it. He'd prance around on his horse Charlie in front of the Nauvoo Legion with this sword, right? Very romantic ideals, and yet we don't find those ideals in the Book of Mormon. We find ancient warfare, ancient Mesoamerican specific warfare. Then he turns and he says, great, I read about this Book of Enoch in the Bible, I'm going to produce a Book of Enoch, right? And he does. He conjures up a Book of Enoch. It just so happens that after that we find books of Enoch, and he matches those books of Enoch in these specific detailed themes and in ways in the 22 that we went through. Then he buys the mummies. He's intrigued. And he says, well, I'm not done. I did a Book of Enoch. Now I'm going to do a Book of Abraham. And I'm going to, again, just conjure it. I'm going to make stuff up. And he does that. Specific details about his life. Those then have to be matched by ancient texts that we don't have then, that we find later. We went through all of these specific things that are matched in his Book of Abraham with ancient texts that we have now. Then he goes through Freemasonry. He says, great, I am going to continue the creation of this is my ultimate act, and I'm going to take Freemasonry and I'm going to splinter it and create my own thing. And so he says, but don't worry, the ancients had this and Jesus had this, and he gives the endowment. Well, then we have to find ancient texts that corroborate specific endowment themes, matching it to Jesus. Essentially, every unique aspect of the endowment we find in ancient texts. Finally, again, through all of this is documents, these made-up revelations and books of Scripture. He's got to weave into it this theology, right? This fairly unique theology that solves, in many respects, centuries-old philosophical and Christian-specific problems. It goes against the grain in almost every way from his surrounding culture and the Christian theology that was available to him. Yet, it has to be found to be consistent in most cases with earliest forms of Christianity and provide for millions now guidance on the abiding anxieties of life, right? I've talked about how, for me, this is all intellectually compelling, but what moves me are things like the problem of evil and the problem of atonement, which has affected my life and affect millions of people's lives. So he has to, as a charlatan, he's got to produce an actual theology. In many cases, traditional theology has to move closer to him over the next 200 years, right? And then we talked about him dissolving non-being and mind-body and on and on and on. I would argue that it's highly improbable that Joseph Smith could have accomplished B through O. Therefore, I would argue from an argument to improbability that it's that first proposition that he's a fraud through metallurgical fraud, massive gnosis, and made-up nonsense is false, that it's reasonable that he in fact possessed plates, translated those plates, and received revelation as he claimed. That is the argument from absurdity. And Bloom, when he was looking at it, was really only looking at his stuff on Enoch, and he was amazed of what he could do with Enoch, and he was also amazed by theosis. But he didn't go through everything. It's not even close to what I've gone through. But I think that's for those that don't want to say he's a prophet and find enough reasonable evidence to convince them he's not. Again, you got to be in awe of this guy and what he was able to accomplish.
Now, while that case may be compelling and give us reasons to believe, I personally find that it's the fruits of what Joseph did that are the greatest witness that God was indeed working through Brother Joseph.
When Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram started for Carthage to face what they knew would be an imminent martyrdom, Hiram read these words of comfort to the heart of his brother. Thou hast been faithful. Wherefore thou shalt be made strong, even unto the sitting down in the place with which I have prepared. in the mansions of my Father. Later, when actually incarcerated in the jail, Joseph the prophet turned to the guards who held him captive and bore a powerful testimony of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon. Shortly thereafter, pistol and ball would take the lives of these two testators. As one of 1,000 elements of my own testimony of the divinity of the Book of Mormon, I submit this as yet one more evidence of its truthfulness. In this, their greatest and last hour of need, I ask you, would these men blaspheme before God by continuing to fix their lives, their honor, and their own search for eternal salvation on a book, and by implication a church and a ministry they had fictitiously created out of whole cloth? Never mind that their wives are about to be widows and their children fatherless. Never mind that their little band of followers will yet be houseless, homeless, and friendless, and that their children will leave footprints of blood across frozen rivers and an untamed prairie floor. Never mind that legions will die and other legions live, declaring in the four quarters of this earth that they know the Book of Mormon and the church which it espouses it to be true. Disregard all of that and tell me whether in this hour of death these two men would enter the presence of their eternal judge, quoting from and finding solace in a book which, if not the very word of God, would brand them as impostors and charlatans until the end of time. They would not do that. They were willing to die rather than deny the divine origin and the eternal truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. For 179 years, this book has been examined and attacked, denied and deconstructed, targeted and torn apart, like perhaps no other book in modern religious history, perhaps like no other book in any religious history. And still it stands. I did not sail with the brother of Jared. I did not proselyte with Alma and Amulek, nor witness the fiery death of innocent believers. I was not among the Nephite crowd who touched the wounds of the resurrected Lord. But my testimony of this record and the peace it brings to the human heart is as binding and unequivocal as was theirs. I want it absolutely clear when I stand before the judgment bar of God that I declared to the world in the most straightforward language I could summon that the Book of Mormon is true, that it came forth the way Joseph said it came forth and was given to bring happiness and hope to the faithful in the travail of the last days. Brothers and sisters, God always provides safety for the soul, and with the Book of Mormon, He has again done that in our time. Remember this declaration by Jesus Himself: "Whoso treasureth up my word shall not be deceived. And in the last days, neither your heart nor your faith will fail you."
So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it.